What is up, Rad Potential YouTube, and welcome to another radformational segment on learning about cool old cars and stuff you can do to make them better. So, we're here to talk about the specific topic of putting an RX8 transmission into your first generation RX7. And I say first generation RX7 because it really kind of doesn't work in the later models. You could probably make it work, but it really kind of doesn't work just with the shifter location and everything. So, on a first gen, I guess we'll just start with the things you need to put this in your car. Okay, number one, a mild bit of fabrication equipment. So, i.e. a welder and a cutoff wheel, or you could just have a cutoff wheel and you could make this a cutoff wheel and a drill, so you can make the transmission bracket to hold the back of the transmission. Second thing, you need an RX8 transmission, you need the RX8 shifter, you need a counterweight for your motor. So I'm not going to assume that you have a 12A or whatever in your car, but you need whatever counterweight, the rear counterweight, to go on the back of it, i.e. this thing right here. You need a flywheel to go on that counterweight that fits a Turbo 2 or an RX8. And the only other way you could do this too without having to have a counterweight is if you have a Series 4 or Series 5 rotating assembly. You could run the Series 4 or Series 5 Turbo 2 flywheel. You will also need the RX8 starter, and you will need the RX8 bell housing bolts. Also, an RX8 clutch slave cylinder. And you will need a Turbo 2 to whatever rear end you have adapted drive shaft. So if you have a 83 to 78 car, so 78 to 83, you have a small bearing axle, the rear drive shaft flange is smaller. If you have an 83 or 84 to 85, you have the big drive shaft flange like that one. And Mazda Tricks sells that drive shaft all put together already, the proper length to go to a GSLS rear axle, which is the big bearing one. $326, just looked it up. So you'll need to do that. Now I'm going to show you real quick the mount that you'll have to make. So this is basically how this one's done right here. So you have the factory transmission mount. Brackets up here, piece of C channel bolted to the power plant frame mounts on the RX8 tranny. Fancy little piece of steel bar, crosses, and then so it goes down, crosses under the trans, comes back up on that side to connect to the factory mount. So here you can kind of see what it looks like up in here. This transmission's big, okay, much bigger than your stock one, and but it does fit on the back of the rotary, so you just gotta bolt it in. Okay, now, another important topic for this beast. In a first gen, there's two different shifter locations, okay, for first gens as a whole. So if you have an SA, so 78 to 80, your shifter is further forward in the car than if you have an FB, which is 81 to 85. Your shifter is at the back of the transmission, like this one over here. Right here. Okay, so if you see this shifter all the way at the back, and on an SA the shifter is literally like right, you take this bolt and move it to that spot. So take this and put it up here. Okay, this is an FB transmission. You see how small it is. On an RX8 trans, the shifter is in the same position as an SA transmission. So the hole in your floor, your trans tunnel, will line up perfectly. Okay, it'll just fit right in. Now, if you have an FB, right, the shifter thing comes back a good bit, okay, to reach where the shifter is, and you will have, so if you can imagine, I have the trim piece right here. You can imagine your shifter coming up right here in the middle, okay, and you put the RX8 transmission, it's going to come up right here. Alright, so it will clear the ashtray probably, but it is going to be much further forward. So, like I said, in your FB, like say a Series 3 car like that, it might not fit that well, and you may have to take the shifter and build a custom shifter to move the point of attachment, or the point of your knob for the back. So basically, if this is your transmission right here, we're just gonna sketch this up like so. So this is your whole transmission, okay? On an FB, the shifter's here, and on an SA, the shifter's here, right? So FB, SA. In an SA car, the factory shifter does do something like this, okay? Your stock shifter for an SA, it does rock back like that, but the hole is still further forward. So if you put the RX8 transmission in, your shifter will be straight and it'll be right here. Well, on an SA, the dash is shorter. You know, the dash only comes back to there, and then it goes up. Okay, so on the FB car, this part of the dash is the same, but you have the shifter hole, which is further back here. Okay, so on a Series 3, this dash does stick back a little further, so like a GSLSE or 84 to 85 car. So what you could do, because you won't have the shifter here, and the RX8 train will be in the front, is you can take the RX8 shifter, have it only come up to there, put like a bar or something in here, and then have your shifter thing come back there. And then your shift boot, this you might have to trim it a little bit up in here, but in reality, this thing will still line up in the same hole night, because this is going to move like that versus being a vertical dilly whopper. So those are the things you have to overcome. Now, if you noticed in my race car, basically cut the whole top of the trans tunnel out, put an aluminum plate down. Wherever the hole was, that's where it went through. I don't have any surround, don't have nothing, so it doesn't really matter. The big benefits to it, really, just to go over it quickly, closer gear ratios. 6th gear is actually less of an overdrive than the 5th gear in your 5-speed, so it's not going to give you, it's not an extra gear, right? It's just closer gear ratios. It's not going to make your RPMs at cruising speed any higher, or it's going to make them higher, it's not going to make them lower. And the other thing, which I said this before, is I think they shift better at higher RPM. That's just me. I broke a bunch of 2nd gear synchronizers and 1st gear transmissions, 3 of them to be exact, and they just hated like an autocross. You know, you ring 1st gear all the way out, you grab 2nd really hard, broken. So, and I mean, these are used transmissions. It's not like I bought one of these cars brand new, so they could have been pretty wore out anyways. But so that's basically that. So if you want to put an RX8 trans in your 1st gen, you can do that. The reason that I say it's tough to put it in an FC is that the FC, the shifter position, is so far back, and the motor sits so far away from the shifter location. You know, it's just the same as an FB, but it sits so far away, and there's so much dash in the way. You know, like in an FC, the dash area is so big, and there's just no room to move the shifter forward in an FC. Just with the shifter surround and how all that works, you're going to be cutting right into the face of the dash. It's just going to be way too far forward. So that's kind of why I don't think it would work in an FC. The FD is going to get much more complicated because it's got a power plant frame as well. So you have to figure that all out. Just how to mount it with the stock power plant frame, and also on an FD, the shifter is pretty far back on the transmission as well, so it really kind of doesn't want to fit in one of those. But that's the gist of it. It's really not like a terribly hard swap. It's not a really terribly expensive swap. It's the same as just mounting like a Turbo 2 trans or something like that. And basically everything to swap a Turbo 2 trans into your 1st gen would be the same. So if you have, except for the shifter, so you would need the counterweight for your motor. You'd need a Turbo 2 diameter clutch, because Turbo 2 and the RX8 flywheels are the same diameter. You need a Turbo 2 starter, because it is different from the NA one. You would need the same drive shaft. For an FB owner, so you have the further back shifter position, the Turbo 2 transmission, the shifter will be in the right spot for your car, because it sits back just like this does. It sits pretty much over the yoke. Okay, pretty much right here. Now, if you have an SA and you want to keep all your stock stuff and keep the stock hole in the floor, you'll have to shorten the shifter location, shorten the shifter basically. So I'm going to pull this cover off real quick, and basically under here there's a rod that comes up through this tube right here and goes into this cast housing. On that rod is what we'll call the shift selector, or the part where the bottom of your shifter, the ball on the bottom of your shifter rides in. So making a little bit of a mess, but no big deal. So this piece right here, okay, and your shifter comes in here, and you can see this moves back and forth, and it's tied into this rod that runs down through this hole. Okay, so to shorten this, what you need to do is you need to take this housing off, this big aluminum housing, cut it right here in front of these double bolts. Take these double bolts, bolt it in up here to these. This distance right here between the two bolts will be how much you'll have to shorten the rod in here as well. Okay, so you'll shorten this rod down, but before you do that, and you have this hole up here still where this piece is, it's either roll pinned or bolted. This one's bolted, but you can see that that is tied into that rod, so it can rotate it when you move it left and right. You need to mark the orientation of that hole so that when you cut the rod, you can re-drill it, and then the foot that's on the end of that rod stays to the same orientation to the shifter. Okay, so you'll need to cut it this much shorter, so it'll move it from here to here, and then you're good to go. Put it all back together. The shifter should be in the right spot. So it's really, like I said, nothing crazy fancy to get it done. I've never personally done it. I know people who have, and I've seen transmissions that are cut like that. And it's a fairly simple thing. You're just moving the shifter forward. It'll fit in your hole. You will have, the shifter will be vertical if it comes out of one of these. So the stock SA shifter, like I showed earlier, does a little notch back dealy whopper. So you might have to reach a little further forward. I know in the race car and the RX8 training, it is just vertical there. So it is a little tougher to get to, but otherwise not too bad. So with that, that's everything that you need to know to T2 or RX8 transmission. Swap your first gen RX7. Those transmissions are stronger, so if you're making power, maybe that's what you want. Thanks for tuning in. If you need to see any more how-to videos, feel free to search on the channel, and I'll keep doing some fun rotary stuff for you. Keep it rad.